In the first lecture of this week, we looked into the natural development, characteristics and behavior of rivers in general. In the next lecture, we shall look at how rivers shape the landscape, but especially at how humans influence this development, by intervening and by making the rivers respond. In this lecture, we will refer to the Netherlands Rhine River and its historic development, for two reasons. We know it best, and it is where the Room for the River program was implemented. On the satellite picture, you see this river during flood stage. Everything between the rivers is protected alluvial plain. And the red circles you see now indicate locations, or rather bottlenecks in the river, which you will see again later in this presentation. For your general orientation, here is a map of the Netherlands which shows that the majority of it is a delta of two large rivers, the Rhine River and the Meuse River. About 30% of the country lies below sea level, but as much as 60% is flood prone. This means about 30% are not coastal plains, but alluvial plains, deposited by the rivers and prone to river flooding. The origin of these alluvial plains becomes clear when we look into this geological reconstruction of the development of the central part of the Dutch delta by Utrecht University. That is, its development since the last ice age, when the sea was about 70 meters lower than it's now. In the map, we see the Rhine and Meuse rivers enter the Netherlands from the right and flow into the sea on the left. The map covers about 150 kilometers in length. The colors on the map represent different geological ages. In light blue, we see a huge valley as it existed during the last ice age. On top of this, we see a sequence of blue, green, via yellow and orange, when the Romans occupied us, to red. The colors represent different stages since the end of the Ice Age and through the Holocene. For quite some time, the Rhine River slightly resembled the Brahmaputra River, a braiding middle reach of a river that extended well into the current North Sea. It carried coarse sediments, gravel and sands, from a catchment carrying lots of meltwater after the glaciation. With the climate becoming more temperate and the sea rising, the river changed character from braiding to meandering, while in the west, on the left, the tides from the sea began to influence the river's behavior. See the red color. In this and the next few sheets, humans are led on stage. First, they were attracted by the fertile soils of the alluvial plains. These were extremely suitable for agriculture, as they gave high yields. And moreover, transport of crops to markets was easy along rivers, as long as you had a boat. This led to the rapid development of agriculture in the alluvial plains and trade along the rivers. But obviously, you had to adapt to the whims of the river, especially floods. In the picture on the left, you see how agriculture along the Mekong River in Vietnam utilizes the recurrent and along the Vietnam rivers quite predictable seasonal floods to the max. In wet environments like alluvial plains, paddy rice cultivation is perfect. This means that in Vietnam, recurrent flooding is still considered beneficial. It is even controlled to such a degree that it supports 2 rice crops per year, the so-called double rice, while at the same time allowing the river to refertilize the land by allowing flooding and by allowing the deposition of fine sediments. In the Netherlands, until about the 1960s, something similar was the case, when farmers used to welcome occasional floods in winter while keeping out floods and keep their cattle grazing during the growing season. To this end, they erected low embankments. But with the growing population, the demands for more agricultural land increased, and floods became considered a nuisance ever more often. So the Netherlands began constructing embankments in order to prevent flooding when unwanted and to make more land available and suitable for agriculture. Embankments, which we call dikes, a word now internationally understood and even adopted, although the correct English word is embankment and the American is levee, but more general you might say flood defense. In the Netherlands, these embankments were begun at small scales and low levels in many places. But along the rivers a milestone was reached already around 1450 AD, some 600 years ago, when all embankments were connected into one continuous infrastructure of dikes bordering the rivers. The consequence of this was that during a flood, the river could no longer inundate the entire alluvial plain with its former channel belts and back swamps. And that meant a discontinuity between the alluvial plains and the actual floodplain. A first and obvious consequence, as shown on the right-hand side on top, are higher flood levels in the river because during a flood, the same amount of water must be discharged through a narrower, straight-jacketed river. That is the first hydraulic response of the river to human intervention. Secondly, the sediment carried by the river is no longer spread out over the entire alluvial plain, but is being deposited in the active floodplains. This causes the floodplain to go up at the expense of discharge capacity. That is the second morphological response of the river to this human intervention. At the same time, the deprived alluvial plains became gradually lower as a consequence of subsidence. In the early days of a fully embanked river, the river and its active floodplains still looked quite natural, with islands and banks and often multiple shallow channels. But that would change soon enough, as you will hear later. First, however, we illustrate how the perceived benefits of better protection against floods brought about a desire among the people to further develop the now well-protected land. The maps we show here illustrate how in slightly more than 150 years, the city of Arnhem and surroundings developed at the cost of floodplain area. By the way, this is where I drafted one of the red circles on the first sheet of this presentation, the top one. As you can see, the city expanded close to the river into the protected alluvial plains, and also highway and railroad infrastructure were developed. Altogether, this results in an area which is now much more vulnerable in case a flood would hit. More people, more property. While at the same time, the discharge capacity of the river is reduced because a bottleneck is created. No plumber would have allowed this if it had been a sewage system. In this graph, we plotted the available floodplain area along the Rhine River for consecutive years since 1850 AD, not so long ago. It shows that the floodplain area is reduced by more than 50%, a development that ended not so long ago. This slide summarizes the joint evolution of the alluvial plains and society in maps for different years, from left to right and top to bottom, from about 100 AD to 2016. Confinement of the river between embankments and fast urban development when the population size exploded during the last century. By the way, such developments not only took place in the Netherlands, of course. We know of similar loss of space from the Elbe River in Germany, the Mississippi River in the USA, and many, many other rivers. And we can observe the consequences of population increase and migration to rivers and coasts, a desire to economically develop, little attention for the importance of ecosystems, and trust in flood control and engineering all around the world. One more sheet to finish this message, for very little is new, and I want to give credit to who deserves it. For it was the American geographer White who coined the term levee effect. Levee effect is a description of exactly what we see, the mutual influence of improved flood protection and societal development, as depicted on the left. The better protected people feel, the more they dare to invest. But the more they own, the louder their call for better protection. And when they get these higher dikes, they invest even more, etc., etc. A vicious spiral, leaving insufficient room for the river. That things really work out like this is obvious from the picture at the bottom. As said, 30% of our country is prone to river flooding. So far, about the joint evolution of rivers and societies. Next week, you'll learn more about other human interventions in rivers and on how rivers respond to those interventions. For in rivers, any intervention causes a response. Oh, and as for this sheet, I promised you coming back on both the red circles on the map of the introduction, but so far just refer to the top one. The bottom one is showed on the picture behind me after implementation of Room for the River at this former bottleneck. You will hear more about it in the next weeks. Enjoy!